us as black women, Paige reminds me a lot of you. Like, you say you're not really about me. And she knows how her privilege has gotten her to that point. And also, like, she's good at basketball, obviously. But, like, she understands her privilege. It's like what pushes her over the top, in a sense. It reminds me a lot of you.
There's no room for any kind of racism. Now, I'm not calling everybody racist. I'm not calling most folks. But the few who are, you know who the hell you are. Calm the hell down.
Caitlin Clark found herself on the wrong side of a tough matchup against two of the most dominant players in women's basketball, Angel Reese and A'ja Wilson, when Clark, a superstar in her own right, stepped onto the court for what was expected to be a highlight reel-filled showdown. Nobody anticipated the sequence of events that would follow. It wasn't just a game. It was a clash of heavyweights, and it didn't end the way many thought it would for Clark. But before we proceed further, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe. From the very beginning, it was clear that this wasn't going to be a walk in the park for Clark. Angel Reese and A'ja Wilson weren't just bringing their A game, they had a point to prove. Reese, who has built a reputation for playing tough and making life miserable for her opponents, was in prime form. She's known for getting inside players' heads and, perhaps more importantly, for getting inside their shooting percentages. Then there was A'ja Wilson, the kind of player who, with a single powerful stride and relentless presence, can make even the best look ordinary. Clark came out swinging, doing what she does best, commanding the offense, dishing out assists, and knocking down threes. For a moment, it felt like just another day at the office for her. But that changed quickly as Reese and Wilson started ramping up the pressure. It was like trying to drive through a brick wall that just kept moving closer. Reese's defensive intensity and physicality set the tone, throwing Clark off her rhythm in a way few had ever managed to do. Reese's style is all about making the court smaller and the options fewer for her opponents. For Clark, it was a game of chess in which the pieces were moving faster than she anticipated. Wilson, meanwhile, was a one-woman wrecking crew in the paint. Anytime Clark made a move towards the basket, it seemed like Wilson was already there, waiting. And when Wilson wasn't directly blocking shots, her looming presence was enough to force missed layups and hurried decisions. Wilson's defensive efforts weren't just effective. They were downright disruptive. She wasn't playing defense, she was dictating the pace and forcing Clark to improvise, something that even the most skilled players struggled to do against someone of Wilson's caliber. For fans who tuned in expecting to see Clark's usual smoothness, it felt like watching a great musician hit wrong notes over and over again. It wasn't just that she was missing shots or having her passes intercepted. It was how uncomfortable she looked trying to figure out the puzzle in front of her. Clark, usually so collected and confident, found herself scrambling, dealing with the unfamiliar sensation of being consistently outmaneuvered. There was a moment when she tried to shake off Reese with one of her signature crossovers, but Reese stuck with her like a shadow, closing the gap with the tenacity of someone chasing down their last meal. On the offensive end, Reese and Wilson kept it simple and efficient. Reese capitalized on her mid-range shots and drew fouls with her aggressive drives. Wilson, on the other hand, used her sheer size and finesse to get easy buckets down low. While Clark's attempts to regain control of the game grew more desperate, Wilson and Reese seemed to be having fun out there. They were in sync, moving like a well-oiled machine and communicating with subtle glances and nods. Their chemistry was unmistakable, and in stark contrast to the visible frustration starting to bubble up on Clark's face. What's interesting is how they approached Clark strategically. Reese made sure to press her tightly, using her quickness to deny open looks and force contested shots. Wilson was more like the enforcer in a hockey game, making her presence felt by always being around to clean up any mistakes. If Clark managed to shake free of Reese, she'd find Wilson waiting at the rim. It was like playing a video game set to the hardest difficulty level, where every move was anticipated before she could make it. As the game progressed, Clark couldn't find an answer. Time and time again, her efforts to push through were stifled, and her growing exasperation was noticeable. She's a fierce competitor who thrives on big moments, but in this instance, it felt like she was running into a revolving door of frustration. At one point, after missing a contested layup, Clark stared up at the scoreboard and let out a deep sigh, the kind of sigh that makes you realize this isn't just a rough patch, it's a rough game. The broadcasters seemed to notice the change in Clark's body language too. They pointed out that she was taking longer between possessions, perhaps trying to gather herself or slow things down. But the game wasn't waiting for her to catch her breath. Reese and Wilson were in complete control, dictating the pace and making every possession feel heavier than the last. There was a particularly telling moment late in the third quarter when Clark tried to drive baseline. She saw an opening, one she usually exploit without hesitation. But as she turned the corner, Reese cut her off with a perfectly timed slide, and Wilson stepped up, towering over her like a linebacker sniffing out a quarterback. Clark had nowhere to go and threw an off-balance pass that sailed out of bounds. She shook her head in disbelief, and it was clear she knew this wasn't just a bad game. It was a statement gained by her opponents. Reese's intensity and Wilson's dominance weren't just physical, they were psychological. Clark is used to being the player who dictates the flow of the game, the one who forces her opponents to play her way. But in this matchup, it was Reese and Wilson calling the shots. Clark looked like someone trying to solve a Rubik's Cube in a windstorm. Every time she got close to an answer, the pieces shifted again. The crowd seemed to feed off the energy, too. Every time Reese clamped down defensively or Wilson swatted away a shot, the fans roared. It felt less like a game and more like a spectacle. Clark is no stranger to big moments, but this was a different kind of pressure, one that even the most seasoned veterans would struggle with. Reese and Wilson had the swagger of players who knew they were in control, and that confidence only seemed to grow as the game wore on. What stood out was how neither Reese nor Wilson ever let up. Even when they were clearly ahead, they kept the pressure on, never giving Clark a chance to catch her breath or regain her footing. It wasn't about running up the score or making a statement. It was about staying sharp and maintaining their dominance. The best teams and players understand that letting up, even for a moment, can be costly, and Reese and Wilson show that mentality in full force. Clark, for all her talent and composure, couldn't find a way to counteract the relentless defense. It wasn't just her shooting percentage that took a hit. It was her confidence, her poise, her usual spark. The camera caught her looking at her teammates with an expression that was equal parts bewildered and determined. The kind of look that says, "I know this isn't going well, but I'm not giving up." And give up, she didn't. Clark kept battling, even as the outcome became increasingly inevitable. She fought for loose balls, tried to spark her team with hustle plays, and didn't stop talking to her teammates, urging them to keep pushing. In the end, Clark's efforts weren't enough to overcome the dynamic duo of Reese and Wilson. As the final buzzer sounded, the contrast between the two sides was clear. Reese and Wilson exchanged a knowing glance, a nod of acknowledgement that they had done what they set out to do. Clark, meanwhile, walked off the court with the look of someone who had just faced a storm and came out the other side drenched but still standing. The significance of this matchup wasn't lost on anyone watching. It wasn't just about the final score or the statistics. It was about the message that Reese and Wilson sent. They didn't just play to win, they played to dominate. For Clark, this game was a reminder that even the best can be brought down by a well-executed game plan and relentless execution. After the game, the chatter wasn't about Clark's struggles, but about Reese and Wilson's brilliance. There's a certain thrill in watching greatness, in witnessing players rise to the occasion and exceed expectations. And that's what Reese and Wilson did. It didn't just meet the moment. They seized it and made it their own. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more engaging content. We thrive on your feedback, so be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments section below. Until next time, keep discovering and stay tuned.